Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stanford Emergency Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Strehlow, Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Stanford. AI has the power to transform emergency medicine, but for many clinicians, it can feel more intimidating than inspiring. In this episode, two emergency physicians unpack how AI and innovation in acute care can be more practical, more collaborative, and more exciting. To help us make sense of it all, I'm joined by Dr. Dev Dash and Dr. Andy Chu. Dr. Dash is an emergency physician and assistant professor who loves finding new ways to use technology to improve patient care. He's a former vice president of the American Medical Informatics Association Clinical Fellows. His projects range from AI tools that predict heart function, from real-time systems at the bedside, and helping develop tools that bring patient information closer to frontline workers. Dr. Chu is an emergency physician and assistant professor who is passionate about bringing innovation and startup ideas into everyday medicine. He has co-led multidisciplinary teams in building award-winning healthcare technologies that are now used in more than 170 countries. Outside of medicine, he channels his passion for storytelling as an independent filmmaker. His film, Life Support, has been screened at many film festivals and has earned multiple jury awards for Best Short Film. Dr. Dash, Dr. Chu, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
Well, gentlemen, you guys have immense experience in AI, innovation, technology, and implementation. But one thing I've noticed is that everybody's got a great idea, and there's no shortage of great ideas in healthcare. But turning them into real change is really where it's very difficult. What have you learned about how innovation can actually work in the real world and the complex health systems in which we operate?
Yeah, Matt, I love this question, which is essentially, how does innovation really work in the real world, right? And I think that especially in modern Americana, there's this mythos of the lone genius, right? The lone hero, especially in Silicon Valley, that drives all the innovation in the world. And that's just frankly not true. That's not how innovation works, because the literature shows, and also our own experiences show, that if you want to make innovation happen, teamwork makes the dream work. And I see that based on classic and modern literature around collective intelligence, right? It's not the smartest person in the room that drives that innovation. It's actually the teams, the smartest teams, that know how to communicate effectively, that take turns speaking, and also showcase empathy. And there's this great talk by Bill Gross, who is the founder of IdeaCast, right? He has this legendary TED Talk that talks about what is it, after studying hundreds of startups, that make the best startups succeed. And the most important controllable human factor is actually teamwork and execution, right? So making sure that we communicate effectively, that we treat each other with respect, that is what drives innovation. And I think that's the North Star of the lab that Dev and I have co-founded and we lead. We optimize for the team. So let me just give Dev a shout out. The reason I love working with Dev is he's a brilliant guy, but there are a lot of smart people at Stanford. He's also incredibly kind, right? He's a good human being. He's a reliable partner and a wonderful friend. And we treat all our teammates the same way. And I think that is what truly drives innovation.
Dev, what do you say to that? You got kudos all around. What do you think, what makes innovation possible and impactful in the real world? Like, what is the difference between the great idea and the actual implementation?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I'm also with Andy on this. I definitely think it's a team and your power to communicate, but also be resilient and flexible with respect to your teammates. And so we co-lead a lab together, and he's a great partner to work with. He understands a lot of the problems that I go through in our personal lives, because we both have young kids and like growing families, and having that connection is really important. And I think being able to translate some of our difficulties in scheduling or getting things done, I think Andy's really good at balancing that teamwork aspect of it. I have worked with a lot of teams where the flow of information is not great. And I've seen a lot of teams that struggle with this. And the one thing I always mention to Andy is my primary goal when we're working together is minimize the information asymmetry. Like, he should know as much as I know and vice versa, so we can come to decisions that are well thought out. And I feel like when we talk about our plans and our strategies, it's not two brains. It feels like 3 or 4 brains. Sometimes we loop in a language model and there's 5 or 6 brains. And so we work together really well, and finding somebody that you can tell everything to and be perfectly honest with is key here. Because you never want to be in a situation where you're struggling with a problem, but you're also mincing words when you talk to your team.
You guys have obviously formed an amazing collaborative team, right? And I know that we often think about like, oh, it's building these teams that speak and communicate well, like you mentioned. But clinicians and tech innovators, I feel like we often are speaking different languages, right? How have you seen it work, and what are the common fail points?
I could speak to this a little bit, and it's been a struggle for, I think, anybody who works in the innovation landscape, because you personally never have all the skills necessary to execute on a project, company, and what have you. So always have to collaborate with people. And often the people who have the most bandwidth are sometimes outside the Stanford ecosystem, because everybody at Stanford has a lot of things on their plate and they're all very busy. So when we're trying to find partners or find good teams to work with, the most effective collaboration, I feel, is rooted in honesty and being like, hey, these are our pain points. Are you honestly interested in working with us on this? Do you think you can help address one of our pain points? And if you can, go a little bit deeper and starting with a small scale kind of exploration, and maybe grow that exploration from there. At the same time, keeping that communication band wide open and saying, hey, we talk about this problem. I did a little bit digging in the charts. This is what I found. Are you still interested in this? And is this something you can still address? Or do you need to build out your own team and come back to us and say, oh, I finally have somebody a little bit more technically versed. I can come talk to you and we can build a solution together. When I mentor informatics fellows, they often come to me and say, I really want to work on an AI project or machine learning project. Do I need to learn how to code? My answer previously used to be no. These days, it's like, you need to know like the basics of programming languages because you need to have that shared vocabulary. And if you don't have that shared vocabulary, everything will take 4 times as long, because this other person who knows nothing about medicine, or maybe has not even stepped foot in a hospital, is really excited to work on a healthcare problem, also doesn't have that shared vocabulary. And I also tell my informatics fellows, not only do you need to learn the vocabulary and the lingo and the tech stack, not to, a senior developer level, but at least a little bit to communicate, but you also have to tell your collaborators to come find you in the ED. Come to the lobby, show up. We're going to give you a tour. This is what an emergency room looks like. This is what our clinical processes look like. And if you find somebody who is willing to spend hours and hours with you at the bedside, I think that's a really good sign. And that's really important for collaboration.
Yeah. Do you have a background, Andy, in this, or this is something you learned as, this language? Did you learn that kind of on the fly, or did you get formal training? Like, how did you make that work? Because it's pretty intimidating for me to think that I'm going to learn the coding language right now, right? So I can speak to these innovators and these AI developers.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Dev in the sense that now it's very important to understand the language of the software engineer and learning how to code. So I'm having a blast learning from Dev and also learning from my wife, who happens to be a software engineer. She's wicked smart. And we actually built a clinical app together. And I learned from that experience very acutely how important it is to have clarity. So Dev mentioned honesty. Our amazing software engineering colleagues have a very structured way, right? A very clear way of thinking about how to build a tech stack, the architecture. And if you speak to them in abstractions, you don't get what you want and what the patients need. So for example, the software engineers don't understand the clinical encounters because they're not the ones at the bedside, doing CPR or leading that resuscitation. And so if you don't make it very clear what the physician user needs, then they'll make what they think the doctor needs. And that leads to a product that needs to go through a number of iterations. And so I totally agree with Deb. If you can bring your software engineers to the bedside, see what we go through, breathe that air, see us watching, sitting down, holding that patient's hand. I think that is so important to speaking the language of our software engineers. Also agree with Deb in the sense that sitting down and going to where my wife was at, she would open up her GitHub and show me thousands and thousands of lines of code and libraries. And I would ask her, what does that do? What does that do? What does your what is your backend? How does that work? And that also helps you grow and be a better team player in leading the project.
I feel like a lot of innovators and people with shiny tech tools, they come with this like solution that they've developed, right? And maybe they have not spoken the same language as physicians or care providers that they've interacted with, or maybe they didn't even have them involved early on. And this idea that like, yeah, I've got a solution, now let me go find the problem to fix, I think happens a lot. Deb, I've heard you talk about this pain point first approach to AI and innovation, starting with real world problems instead of building shiny tools and then identifying problems to apply them to. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about that and how that's shaped the development of your partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pain point first is very much rooted in a little bit of biodesign principles. And coming with a solution, I think when we look at technologies in the world, there are very few where the technology was developed first and it started solving problems afterward. And I think the classic example that people always bring up is the internet. And people's like, oh, like people made the internet and all these apps and things came out of it. And I think what many people don't realize is the internet was actually created to solve a military problem, that a military kind of information exchange problem, and not a technology that was just originated out of somebody's mind. And then all these solutions flew out of it. The pain point first approach is super important because within the health system, and health systems are often what I feel microcosms of society, you need to have many people involved in your solution. So there are very few workflows that don't intersect with physicians and nursing and residents and text and like housekeeping stuff. That you need to have teams that are invested in solving these problems. To become with a solution, it's very hard to convince somebody to jump on board the solution when they don't have internal motivation to join your team in the first place. Whereas if you start with a pain point first problem, something that everybody understands, it's much easier to build a team around this and think, okay, now we're going to go try to find the solution. That being said, you should also think about what a potential solution looks like when you're addressing pain points. Because if you don't do that, then you'll always have a little bit of difficulty in creating the solution in the first place. So having that 30,000 foot view is always helpful, not just thinking about the pain point, but also thinking a little bit about the solution. But we should start at the pain point because that's how you build a team to solve a problem.
Andy, I know you have a lot of experience with biodesign and development and innovation and stuff. Do you have anything that you like from that biodesign angle, like tips for people or other key points they should know about when they're thinking about this?
I love how, Dev, you gave a shout out to the Stanford Biodesign Fellowship because 2 words, due diligence, right? I 100% agree with finding the right problem. Is it a hair on fire problem? Are we actually solving a clinical workflow issue, a patient care issue that adds value to the system, helps the metrics that we actually care about? Or is it, and we see this all the time, Dev, when we get pitched by startups, a solution that's looking for a problem which you want to avoid at all costs? And so when I say due diligence, I love being a doctor, Dev, and I love saving lives. But when we look at our own projects or also working with industry partners, we have to put on our MBA, our venture capital hat and think about, look at the leadership, the team, always the team. Do they have that clinical expertise? Especially if it's a health tech problem that they're creating a solution for. Do they have a doctor as a founding member, or do they have a doctor that they can deeply engage with so that they understand what it's like for us as emergency doctors in the midst of the chaos, in all the workflow complexities? And if they do, that's a green flag. If they don't, that's a red flag. Also, thinking about the experience. Are these serial entrepreneurs, right? Have they successfully exited companies with a positive ROI? And also making sure that they have the experience to understand what does it mean to go through FDA review? How do you maintain a model safely, right? How do you iterate and adjust when you see data drift, right? And make sure that you're getting the most accurate outputs for your patients. I think that's incredibly important. But also the runway. Do they have enough money to have a lasting partnership with us that'll last potentially years? Because it takes a lot of commitment for Dev and I to go through that IRB process, to speak with legal, right? To go through, talk to our engineers to make sure that everything is being implemented safely. And also what is the market capture? Are there other peer institutions like Stanford? Are they using the product so that we can actually see real world value instead of hypotheses, and abstractions?
I know you guys are recent parents, so shout out to you. Congratulations, both of you.
Thank you.
I think about my kids, they're like, maybe 20 years or so ahead of yours. And I'm wondering, a lot of doctors have kids that become doctors or go into healthcare. Do you think that, medicine in general and emergency medicine in particular is going to be a viable career path during their lifetime?
So I would say, I think as long as there are humans, there will be doctors, right? And there's this great quote by Hippocrates where if there is this love for medicine, there is a love for humanity. And I would say, speaking for myself, right, if I'm having the worst day of my life, right, if I feel like my life is threatened and I'm dying, as much as I rely on computers and I love machines, I would rather have a human being holding my hand, right, giving me a hug, telling me that it's going to be okay, than any machine. And so I've already asked Sarah Kruzaniak, who's our program director for Stanford Emergency Medicine, save a spot for Ria and baby Sarah for the class of 2050, because even then, and hopefully many centuries afterwards, humans will always be relying on humans for that deep connection and patient care.
It's so true. I think that people want to talk to people regardless of how much technologies are on board. And I don't see computers in general or automation taking our jobs away. Since 1950, only one job has disappeared due to automation, and that's elevator operator. Every other job has changed, and there are more bank tellers now, even though people thought ATMs would replace bank tellers. There are more bank tellers now than any point in human history. Their jobs are different, and their jobs are a little bit more customer-centric rather than doing the kind of the mechanical processes of managing money. But all of these jobs will change. I don't think, especially physicians, especially nurses, are not getting replaced anytime soon by AI models. We will grow to rely on them more and more. So it is becoming especially more important to make sure that our voices are present in the development of these tools rather than relegating it to large tech companies or conglomerates that don't have a strong clinical voice in them.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dev. I would say, maybe the repetitive administrative tasks, and by maybe I mean definitely, those will be replaced. But that's great because it provides an opportunity for baby Sarah and baby Ria to focus on building that empathy, that emotional intelligence to have the best connection with their patients. And that's the reason why Dev and I went to medicine, right? I mean, I didn't go to emergency medicine to build charts. I went in because I want to be there for my patients at their time of need. And same for our children, if they choose to go into emergency medicine. No pressure.
No pressure. Well, so it sounds like you're saying that there'll be jobs available, which is great. I think that's really reassuring, especially people as deep and into this space as you both are, to hear that positive outlook. And you mentioned empathy as something that is very important to both our current work, but also why physicians will be instrumental and central to healthcare in the future. Even though I think some people do debate whether machines can at least act empathetic or mimic empathy to our patients. And there are these studies, right, that look at that. But let's move beyond empathy in that question and say, what other skills do you think might be more important moving forward as we think about this integration of AI and other technologies into our workspace?
Happy to take this question on. I think that I totally agree on the empathy part. Being able to connect to people in any patient or people-facing job is going to be critical. Just like the bank tellers, I think they probably have to have more empathy now than they did earlier, is my guess, when they were mostly managing the machines. One skill I think will define really good positions in the future is flexibility and the ability to pick up new skills. And also brings me to another great philosopher, Nick Bostrom out of Oxford. And there have been a lot of studies done looking at the pace of innovation and how fast things are changing. So if you look at blocks of time and say, okay, let's take 1900 to 1980 being one block of time, a similar amount of innovation happened from 1980 to 2000. And another similar amount of innovation happened from 2000 to 2012. So the world is changing and it's changing at a really fast pace. And being flexible in this world and being able to pick up new skills is paramount. And I tell all of our trainees this is if you don't know something, historically, you've had to go look it up in a book. You have to go look it up and up to date. But you know what? Things are changing. Like now we have models and language models that can access resources. It's your ability to gather information that's actionable for you as fast as possible is a really like unique skill that you need to continue developing. And you need to be well versed in some of these newer technologies. And so you can stay ahead or at least with the pack as our physicians and residents are doing.
I love that. The breadth, the knowledge, the flexibility. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Dev, and also want to include that adaptation is important, but we also want to protect ourselves from erosion, right? As part of the core faculty, we teach our residents and medical students who are using AI more and more. And the big concern we have is erosion, right, of our critical thinking. We have this great fear of automation bias where our learners are more and more dependent on the outputs of the AI tools, and they're not critically thinking through them. There's a lot of power from heuristic experience and seeing a patient case and thinking through it, reasoning through it over and over again. I think that makes us better doctors. But the fear I have, and what we're seeing as well, is that if residents and medical students are too dependent, that skill never develops or it erodes. And I think that is one of the biggest threats to doctors, especially in this generation.
Yeah, it's great to think about what that's going to look like in the future. In what some of us, we're seeing that change now. It's in our space, or at least it's being asked to be in our space today. And so as of today, what's some of the most transformative AI technology you've seen in the acute care space?
I think I can take this one, and I'll speak from both a provider perspective as a physician and a patient perspective. So, I see my pediatrician. I have two girls, and every once in a while we go for our checkups. And she spent a lot more time talking to us now because now she has a tool recording our entire conversation and elements of her physical exam. And I can tell that she is not caught up with documenting a lot of things in the room and just having a much more natural encounter with two parents and two little girls than before. And it feels very different from even a year ago when I was interacting with this same physician, when they would be hurriedly moving from room to room, trying to make sure their clinic is running on time, trying to make sure their documentation is on. From a provider perspective, I use AI scribe technologies at the bedside. We have some at Stanford, and they are instrumental in making sure that the documentation reflects our conversation, and I don't have to worry about remembering all of these details. I do get a little bit worried that my memory is going to get a little bit weaker because I'm not forced to keep all these encounters in my head. But it records everything. It records our conversation, records elements of our physical exam. And for me, the review cost of looking at a generated note is lower than writing the note myself. And I think that is the framework I have in my head on whether a generative AI technology can be transformative at the bedside. There are providers that closely comb through the note and make a lot of changes. I felt like I've never really had to do that. And so maybe their personal generation cost is similar to the review cost. But at least for me, I feel like I can review a note a lot faster than I can generate it myself. So I found these AI scribe technologies to be transformative at the bedside.
Yeah.
Andy, what's transforming acute care what do you see transforming acute care right now?
I agree with Dev in the sense that the things that are the transformative products and tools that are changing acute care, they are happening behind the scenes, behind the curtain. So think of the Wizard of Oz, right? We talk about ambient documentation, makes life easier. We can have smart assistants that help with billing and coding, right? This is not exactly patients facing, but it's super important for making sure the emergency department is functioning as well as it can. So also thinking about technology that helps us with predicting ED surges, right? When we hit 1 p.m., it gets pretty crazy in the waiting room. But also other times throughout the day, if we can anticipate that, then we can optimize for staffing. We can also think about throughput. Technologies that address these pain points that we have allow us as doctors to spend more time with the patients to provide the care that the patients deserve and need. And so I think that is really where the transformation is happening. And just to add to what Dev said about ambient documentation, I've used things like DAX. They're fantastic. But again, talking about skill erosion, speaking for myself, I also feel myself slipping clinically if I'm too reliant on that. So I actually do write my own notes. Thankfully, I'm fast enough. I've done it so many times that it is easier for me. But it's those type of things, like when I use large language models to have certain outputs about sanity checking my thought process, it's great, but I always check it myself and think through, why is that the output I'm getting? And why do I disagree? I think constantly flexing that part of our brain protects it so that we don't lose what makes us outstanding clinicians.
Yeah, we've had some debate at Stanford, and I've heard this debate from colleagues around this country and others actually outside the US around, do we turn on the ambient AI for our trainees and our learners? Like, how does that look? Can we shut off the MDM? And I think there are places that are not using it all for them. I think there are places that are shutting off the MDM. And I think there are places that are kind of like, no, they've got to learn how to learn despite this. I think if you've done this for 20 years or for a long time and you're kind of looking at this, you can spot very quickly that the MDMs need a lot of work, the differentials need a lot of work, the plans need a lot of work. And a lot of my colleagues and our colleagues, I think, are not using that component. But I think that a trainee or a learner is at a different place. And I'm not sure if you guys have ideas on how that could look in the future. I know that, this is an unsolved problem, but what are your early observations or potential recommendations for people out there kind of struggling with this question?
Yeah, there's a great paper from Nejm AI that explores, how do we incorporate AI in medical education? And I would agree with your colleagues who are hesitant and obviously very thoughtful about incorporating ambient documentation or any large language model tool for clinical practice. I would say there is a danger of never skilling. That's a term that's used in the paper. And what that means is that the trainees are so reliant early on that they don't develop that critical thinking, that they never develop that skill set. And that sort of has a compounding effect in their training throughout the years. And so I agree with the health systems, the academic medical centers that sort of allow them to sort of grow, think through the problem, developing that reasoning ability first, and then augmenting that with AI tools. My humble opinion.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's kind of like saying to a toddler, hey, you don't need to learn how to write because you'll be typing 99% of the time anyway. Why do you need to learn how to pick up a pen? There is something about putting pen to paper with your hand that changes your brain compared to typing things out. Yeah. And I wouldn't want to lose that intangible thing in the process because I think the writing skills have been so instrumental in developing language and thought processes. What Andy's saying about getting their trainees not too reliant on technology training.
I definitely write like a physician. You can read the first letter or two of any sentence, and then after that, totally illegible. And I had this conversation with my wife, who's a teacher, and I was like, this is so stupid. None of my kids can write for some reason. All three of them inherited that gene from me, and none of them can write legibly. And she was like, that is not true. And she argued this with me for years and years. And then I went to a few lectures and read a few papers on this, and you're 100% right, Dev. The process of writing is one of the most important ways in which we learn information and process information. And so I have it flipped 100% on that. And I do see that as a nice corollary to this conversation around AI and medical decision-making and building differential diagnoses. You guys have been really positive with a lot of the things. And I think when there's an AI conversation or an innovation conversation in acute care, there can be a lot of fear, a tendency for a lot of negativity. And I appreciate that optimism. Can you give me a little bit more on what are some of the one or two things that are making you most optimistic about the future of innovation in our space, in emergency medicine and acute care? Andy, why don't we start with you?
I think the thing that makes me most optimistic is that there are doctors who want to be engaged with AI and technology so that we're always in the loop, right? Because I feel like if we're not engaged and we're not the pioneers spearheading these efforts, then other stakeholders will make these decisions for us, like the insurers or other administrators, which we all have the patient and their best interests in mind. But I think as doctors, because we provide that bedside care, we can speak to the needs of the physicians, but also the patients and their families better than anyone else can. So it's really exciting for me that doctors are wearing multiple hats now. We're also thinking about the technology, the tech stack, the business aspects, and obviously always about the QI and patient safety elements into our work. And I think this new generation of doctors who are much more, as Dev mentioned, adaptable, flexible, and multidisciplinary in their thinking and engaging with others in different industries and fields, that is such an exciting time to be a doctor right now.
I am going to echo being a physician, just like Andy said. There's never been a day that I go home and I question my value to society because I'm a physician. And I think that's one of the really nice things about being a physician. But being an emergency medicine physician with the schedule flexibility that comes with it, we don't work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 when everybody else works. We have worked all sorts of odd hours and weekends and overnights. But the advantage of that is if you're a flexible person and you can pick up some skills, guess what? Everybody else is working Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And so if you're not working, you're available for those conversations and you're available to get inserted into projects and technologies and be on the front line of research projects just because you're there. And it's so much harder to do that when you're running a clinic. My wife's endocrinologist. She runs the clinic Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. It's so much harder for her to come to some of these conversations because her clinical duties are like kind of at the same time. It's a lot easier to do that at an ED doc. And I think that's one of the key differentiators and benefits of being an ER physician.
I 100% agree with Dev in the sense that I love being an emergency doctor, right? It is hard work. It's honest work, but it's also, I think, the greatest job in the world. And so I think that there's really nothing else I'd rather do, especially with, one of my best friends at Stanford with Dev. So it's been a heck of a ride.
Amazing. I think you'll find that that flexibility is really nice as your kids get older too, to be able to participate in their lives, whether that's at school or volunteer for things. And I'm glad you guys pointed that out. You've given us a lot to think about, both across innovation and the AI landscape. But there's so much coming at most of us, right? Like somehow you guys are finding ways among all the things you're doing to stay current. Give us a few hey, okay, here's one or two things you can do to stay current and on the innovation and AI landscape if this isn't what you're doing 100% of the time, like both of you are.
I will be a little shameless in admitting I am frequently on Y Combinator Hacker News. And they discuss all sorts of topics that are well beyond my understanding. Maybe they're going into hardware discussion, computer systems and things like that. They're both of us stand on shoulders of giants. And I'm very fortunate to have two parents who are deeply embedded into the CS world. So I can always call my dad, who's been in that world and did his career science PhD a few decades ago, and is one of the foremost thought leaders in the computer networking space. And so I'm not afraid to reach out to people and ask questions about things. And accordingly, a lot of people reach out to me about medicine. And so I think that's a really nice conversation to have. But for me, I'm almost every day I'm on Y Combinator Hacker News for a little bit.
Never heard of that. So that's going to be a big jump for me because when my kid came home with their very first CS assignment, I could not help them with it. So that's where I was starting from a few years ago. Annie, what do you suggest for the rest of us to stay up to date on the innovation AI landscape?
Yeah, we have to start somewhere. And I'm also a big fan of YCOM for over a decade now, Hacker News, which is fantastic. For others, it's nice to think outside the box and find these great resources, but also shameless plug. Podcasts like these, right, that touch on innovation AI. It makes the material accessible. And quite frankly, I'm on podcasts all the time. I'm listening to great podcasts like this and others around the Harvard Business Review, great case studies on startups about technology. I think that's a really digestible way to get your foot into the door and understand what's going on, to have your pulse on where healthcare is going, especially in the AI field.
Well, we'll make sure we put that recommendation into the show notes. We like to end on a lighter note. What's something in your life outside of medicine that helps you think more creatively?
I go on bike rides with my toddler into the Baylands up north and bike around the Google campus and the bay and get close to the water and chase rabbits, which she really enjoys. And so I think that clears my mind. I have a gallon of sunscreen in the front of my house. So we'll splather it on and we get on the bike, an e-bike. So it makes my 19-mile bike ride a little bit easier. But I always found that clears my mind a little bit and gives me some cardio.
Yeah, I would say I think Dev and I naturally see the world in sort of mathematics and probability, and that's great for our CS side of our brain, but I definitely need to balance that with the arts and humanities side. So I feel like what I love to do is to write a script or tell stories or make a film. And I feel like when you explore the arts and humanities, when you explore questions about what makes us human, right? Exploring existential questions about why are we here? It helps you better understand and form deeper connections with other human beings, to recognize emotion, subtext, meaning. And I think those experiences, reading a book, writing a book, getting outside the hospital and exploring other hobbies, that's what makes us better innovators, because we can see the world in a way that we otherwise wouldn't. And I would say the day that we lose arts and humanities to technology, to AI, is when we see civilization end. So I know that's a strong statement, but I think a real testament to how much the arts and humanities have transformed my life and helped me with my innovation work. And also my children. I love spending time with my beautiful baby, Sarah. She makes me a better human being, more optimistic, and enjoy living. So I totally agree with Deb, especially when our kids hang out together. Best part of my life.
Well, that's wonderful. I know that there's a lot of people out there that are like, okay, it's okay for me among all these things going on to lean into my love of life, my love of the humanities. It's okay for us to take the time on that. Despite the pace of innovation, I can still be a leader in that space and manage AI as it incorporates into the health systems. That's a wrap for today's episode. Huge thanks to Dr. Chu and Dr. Dash for sharing their insights, their ideas, and a little bit about themselves. For those listening, be sure to check out the show notes for links to their work and studies. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, to leave a review, and to share it with a colleague. And as always, we want to hear from you. Send us your questions, ideas, and feedback at the link in the description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep taking care of anyone, anything, at any time.
Ask you guys one quick favor. I'm just going to quickly make sure my baby's not screaming. So give me like 30 seconds to just optimize. I've already optimized it, but I just want to make sure there's no screaming. She's very loud.
There's our outtake right there.
Yeah.